What are your thoughts on organized chaos, or just the fact that change is the only constant that we have in this perceived reality?
It is. When I think the interesting thing is when you start moving from the machine-based, I'll call it machine-centric thinking, and embracing complexity, what you start realizing is that machine-based thinking is object-centric, and complexity thinking is flow and interrelationship-centric. When you start analyzing a car, you start being obsessed with the objects, right? These are the wheels. These are the so forth. And you start analyzing all of that when you are in the machine-centric view. However, the machine-centric view doesn't work in complexity because look at a forest, right? Well, the first question you ask is, what's a member of this forest and what's not? What's part of this forest and what's not? Well, there's birds that fly in and out, right? They come and they go. There's animals that come and they go. Wind comes in and brings things in, and wind carries stuff out. There are trees that grow, and you would say, well, obviously that tree is a part of the forest, but you come back 100 years from now and that individual tree is gone, right? The objects are transient. It's the web of interrelationships that are actually stable. It's like this forest is 1,000 years old. The forest is an emergent phenomenon, right? Yeah, if you're in an old growth forest, you might have 1,000-year-old tree, but in a lot of forests you go into, there's not a single living thing in that 1,000-year-old forest that was there 1,000 years ago. Every element in that forest has changed. Same thing with, by and large, the material that makes us up as human beings is in flow and flux. We are literally not made of the same material that we were made of when we were children. There's almost no material left in us in terms of carbon atoms and nitrogen atoms and hydrogen atoms and so forth that were in us when we were children. So what does it mean that we are we? Well, what it is that makes me me is actually this web of interrelationships that continues to evolve over time, even as the piece parts come in and out. This is part of what it means to truly look at and understand the world in its complexity, to shift from understanding that the objects are the most important thing to understanding that the flows and interrelationships and the patterning of the events and the interrelationships are what creates this complexity and this emergence.
Yeah, just that's amazing. I love the way you talked about even us ourselves are emergent properties within this containers of emergent properties, and that's the complexity of that. A really simple psychological phenomenon is called the objective permanence. So what that really simply means is when you're exposed to a certain object in your life, sort of law of constants, like oxygen, you don't notice the oxygen. Or if you have lived in the same lavish, luxurious $10 million house, after 6 months, you forget that you live in a luxurious $10 million house. That's that object permanence. And it's so permanent, quote unquote, air quote, that you forget about it. So at the end of the day, what truly sticks is the emergent properties and the things that change. That's part of the deep interconnected web that you alluded to.
It's part of what we call normalcy bias.
Absolutely right. Absolutely
right. Normalcy bias that, whatever you're exposed to, you think about it and it makes a whole lot of sense. We go back to that whole idea that your brain is a huge energy hog and that you come up with these strategies to be able to minimize the amount of really deep processing you have to be doing constantly. And the answer is, from a survival standpoint, if a thing is there and been there and you're used to it and you know what it is and it's not a threat, why should your brain spend a huge amount of energy constantly churning it? The brain is interested in what's new, what's changing. Why? Well, the new thing could be dangerous. The new thing could be an opportunity. It could be food, right? It could be a mate. It could be... So our brain has this novelty bias. That's why I said we have this thing called orienting to novelty. It's because, I know I'm aware of all of the stuff in my environment. I have sort of this background, and as long as it stays the same, and I'm aware that that I'm not attracted to putting a huge amount of cognitive energy into processing it. But when something new pops up, my brain's immediately like, okay, pay attention to that. So it is a survival trait, and it's still with us. We don't live in the wild where the lions are going to get us and where we have to fight for every calorie of food. At least most of us, like here in the United States where I am, most of us aren't in that life anymore, but our bodies are designed that way. Our brains are designed that way. And those strategies still inform our responses to all the stimuli that are hitting us.
Yeah, that's an amazing point, that there is immense energy expenditure associated with fight, flight, or freeze in every decision making. And that is why a lot of people involuntarily like to preserve their physiological response by not reacting to something new and change. And that's, in this way, it's a huge disservice based on the evolution.